Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm going to be talking about my recommendations and TBR for my August priority, which is focused on African authors. If you're not familiar with my monthly priorities, I'll link a playlist to that below, but basically in August I'm going to focus on reading books that are written all by African authors and just do my best to kind of see what emerges from that. This is the first time that I am doing this priority, so it'll be really fun to see. This is something that I actually decided to do because last year there was a readathon called August in Africa, and I thought, oh, that's a perfect idea. I don't think that it's being run this year, but I will link the information about that below. Also, I found out that this past month in July, there actually was a readathon for African fantasy and science fiction run by Soila Kenya. So I'm going to link that below as well because she put together a whole document, a Google Doc, about like all sorts of different African authors and their works, a lot of them for free online. So if you're interested in reading more African authors, I suggest checking that out. So today what I'm going to do is just give my recommendations for a couple of books by African authors that I think I would recommend, and then talk about my TBR for August, the 7 books that I'm going to try to get to. So first, let me give some recommendations of books by African authors that I have enjoyed in the past. First is Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o, illustrated by Vashti Harrison. This is absolutely beautiful children's picture book, really kind of talking about a little girl who has very, very beautiful dark skin, but who feels different from everybody else, especially because her sister and her mother have lighter colored skin. And so it's sort of this fairy tale type thing that talks about why it's beautiful to have any shade of skin. It's a really gorgeous story meant for young kids talking about colorism. Next, I'd like to recommend Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This is a science fiction, sort of utopian, dystopian novel that follows Jam, who is a girl in a perfect society. She lives in a town, Lucille, which has eliminated all bad things, all monsters, and they live this very idealistic life, except that one day this being called Pet appears and tells Jam that actually there is a monster in Lucille and it needs her help finding it. And this story looks at so many different interesting things. It does have some content warnings for things like child sexual abuse, so be aware of that. But it is just a gorgeous novel. It has beautiful writing, and it really examines the idea of what we need to do to call out issues and how there is a lot of resistance to that, even from people who have fought the good fight before. It's a really politically motivated book. It's got great representation. Jam is a trans girl. I loved the relationships between all of the characters. There's just so much beauty to this book, especially in the writing itself. The way that Pet talks is this sort of alliteration almost. It's really, really awesome. So this is a really great book that I think does excellent discussions of a lot of social justice issues, all in a very fantastical setting. So I highly recommend it. Next, I'd like to recommend Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This is a science fiction novella. It's actually the first of 3 that takes place in a future where there is like a space university. So peoples and all sorts of alien beings from all over the universe go to this space university. And we follow Binti, who is a girl from a tribal village in Africa, and she's a genius in math and can do all sorts of amazing things with it. But she is kind of faced with a conflict because she gets acceptance to this space university, except that her people believe you should not leave the homeland. But she kind of sneaks out and goes anyway, only for her spaceship to be attacked by some beings who are at war with the university, and things go down. So this book has a lot of really interesting things. I think the world building is really amazing. It's almost more like science fantasy, like there's a lot of science fiction, but some of it is kind of almost mystical. And I really liked kind of the discussion as well about her being torn between her traditions and her future, as well as just the dynamics between what's going on with the warring beings against the university. It does have a lot of violence in it, so be aware. There's some trauma, things like that, but I thought it was a really great book. Now moving on to my TBR for this August. So these are 7 books that I would like to prioritize. I probably won't get to all of them, but hopefully I'll get to at least 5 of them, and I may add in some other books by African authors throughout the month as I go. So the first book on my TBR is Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. Nnedi Okorafor is a Nigerian-American writer, and as I just mentioned with Binti, I have liked her writing in the past, so I wanted to read more of her work. This is a post-apocalyptic kind of dystopian novel that follows a very special girl born of rape who has to really find a way to end a genocide that is going on in her homeland in Africa. And I've heard really good things about just Nnedi Okorafor's writing in general, and the premise of this sounds pretty interesting. Next on my TBR is Rosewater by Tade Thompson. Tade Thompson is a Nigerian-British writer, and I've heard good things about Rosewater. It takes place in Nigeria in the future, where there is a town that kind of springs up around the edges of this biodome that aliens inhabit, and there's some good things that come out of the biodome, but also it seems like maybe this is a murder mystery. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm just really intrigued and want to pick it up. Next on my TBR is What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Leslie Nneka Arima. So this is a collection of short stories, and it seems like these are somewhere between literary and speculative fiction, which really seems like my jam. I've heard a couple of people really like this collection, so I want to give it a try since I love short stories so much. Next on my TBR is The Shadow King by Maaza Mengistu. Maaza Mengistu is an Ethiopian-American writer, and this is a historical fiction set in 1935 in Ethiopia when Mussolini's troops invaded, and it really focuses on telling the women's stories. So there are a lot of women at that time who fought against what was going on, but they've maybe been erased a little bit by history. So this seems like a feminist take exploring some real historical events, so I'm very interested. Next is Hope is Our Only Wing by Rutendo Tabengerwe, who's a Zimbabwean South African author. This is a YA contemporary set in Zimbabwe about 2 girls who are both dealing with some big issues and their friendship. One of them is dealing with the recent death of her father, and the other one is dealing with a cancer diagnosis. So this sounds like it's going to be a heartbreaking but really beautiful story. Next is Call Me American by Abdi Noor Iftin. Iftin is Somali American, and this is his memoir of leaving Somalia to come to the US, basically as a refugee. So he grew up in Somalia very much in love with Western culture, and after the sort of Islamification of Somalia, he worked with a lot of Western news sources, things like this, to contribute, which got him into a lot of trouble, and he later applied for asylum in the US and got through with the lottery system. So this is kind of about his experiences. I think that this is going to be a really interesting take on kind of that dealing with political refugee issues. And the last book on my TBR is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind by William Kamkwamba and Brian Meiler. Kamkwamba is a Malawian man who is sort of famous. He gave a TED Talk because he is someone who is very ingenious and came up with a way to build a windmill in his hometown to provide some electricity, which they didn't have, based on just finding some books and piecing together random parts of bicycles and things like that. So this is a nonfiction kind of memoir of that experience, kind of overcoming adversity, and I think it sounds like it'll be a really inspiring one. Okay, so those are all of the books that I'm planning to get to in August. If you have read any of these or the ones that I recommended, or if you have any recommendations for me of books by African authors, I would love to hear them. Go ahead and leave me a comment down below and let me know anything that you think of.